Welcome to part two. Hope you're enjoying it. Julian, Joshua Buatsi, and what's it called? Pascal. Eddie's lost purse bid. Yet another one. $1 billion Eddie. He doesn't seem to win many purse bids, does he? What do you think the situation is with these purse bids before we get onto that actual fight, if it'll happen?
Well, first of all, I can't see a reason why Eddie would. I've heard this before, saying he's intentionally not putting in bids high enough to push other people to pay more, etc., etc. I don't buy that. Eddie wants to stage these fights so he can get his fighters with the best kind of like advantage possible. So I don't know what's going on now. Do the DAZN paymasters, do they not trust Eddie with the money? Do they think that he's overvaluing some of these fights? I don't know. It's a strange one, isn't it, for these billionaires, for absolute. DAZN is massive in terms of deep pockets, that they can't seem to win any purse bids right now. It doesn't make any sense. And it's almost like they've cut the purse strings in some ways. I can't see why Eddie wouldn't want to win some of these purse bids. So they're just not bidding
going out
money
to win them by about mile. They're not even in race, are they really? 100 grand now.
Yeah, they're nowhere, are they? And I think it's interesting. I also think personally, I don't know what you think. It's a bit of a bizarre fight, isn't it? It's like Buatsi. Is this really progress? I know Pascal's done this and he's recently been a world champion. This guy I thought it was like 8-9 years since he was doing anything whatsoever. I don't follow it as close as I used to, but
went life and death with Froch, didn't he, for 10 rounds of that fight in 2008.
Exactly. So we're talking like 14 years ago that he was like really coming through. Is this really where we're at? Is this progress now? How many times do I have a beam bonnet, as you know, about the 2016 GB squad, about the effectively a lack of progress? You know, we're 6 years on now, and Joshua Buatsi, who most people were saying was the best of that crop. I always thought Joe Cordina was the best of the bunch, but most people were saying Joshua Buatsi was the absolute best of the crop. He had the most potential. He was going to win this, that, and the other. If you look at it in brutal terms, I'm not talking about Joshua Buatsi fans or casuals. In brutal terms, on a global stage, where is Joshua Buatsi right now?
Nowhere, is he? He's in no man's land, isn't he?
You'd be devastated, wouldn't you? If that was your career. I always talk about the 84, the American 84 squad, the Los Angeles Olympians, how quickly Pernell Whitaker and Meldrick Taylor and Evander Holyfield, how quickly those guys became world champions and household names and massive names. You know, Evander Holyfield was just the same as Buatsi. He was a bronze medalist he was in the 84 Olympics. He won the bronze, slightly different circumstances. But Holyfield 2 years later was winning world titles against formidable opponents like Dwight Muhammad Qawi in the fight of the year. 2 years, 3 years on in Holyfield's career, he was unifying. 4 years on in Holyfield's career, he was the undisputed cruiserweight champion of the world. And Joshua Buatsi, 6 years on, still hasn't even dominated on the British domestic scene, has he? I mean, if his best win, again, no disrespect to Craig Richards, Joshua Buatsi's best win is Craig Richards, which is effectively probably, if you looked at it in brutal terms, because it's a big division, it's a deep division. Craig Richards is outside the top 5 in light heavyweights in Britain. Not in the world. He's not even in the top 5 light heavyweights in Britain. And that is Joshua Buatsi's biggest win so far. Somebody who was touted as being the cream of the 2016.
Next Andre Ward, they were saying, when Tony Bellew and Holyfield.
Yeah, he's the next this, is the next that, but it's all people talk about potential and people's skills. Those skills and potential means nothing if you're not realizing potential. We're not seeing those skills at a higher level. So for me, it just seems like a wasted career. And I think I don't know if it's poor management, if there's something they know that we don't, because sometimes fighters are held back for reasons we don't know. There might be discipline problems. Sometimes fighters get knocked over in the gym and you worry about them. But what we're told is this guy's absolutely brilliant. But I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing a good guy who's got good skills, but he's certainly not one of the best for me. He's not one of the best 2 or 3 light heavyweights in Britain. And I think Callum Smith and both the Callums would get rid of him. And I think Anthony Yard would get rid of him as well. So realistically, you have to say at this point in time, Josh Buatsi's career is a real anticlimax.
A car crash, isn't it?
Awful.
He's with
You know what'll
258,
happen, don't you?
isn't he?
Unless Eddie's got him nailed down to something, he'll leave Eddie. He'll go to Sky because he'll want movement on his career.
Well, it's he needs to get some proper people giving some proper advice, doesn't he, Julian?
And that's where I think Fraser Clarke must be back to big Fraser. Fraser Clarke must be
Big phrase.
He must be watching this stuff. Can I just make a quick comment about Fraser Clarke? And it's not tongue in cheek, it's a serious thing. I love that guy. You know, I've said before, I think Fraser Clarke is absolutely brilliant. He's my favorite boxing personality right now. But I think his stance on knife crime is just, I love his stance on knife crime. I think what a good message that is showing people, you know, to put knives down and to put gloves up, and you can be a better person. He probably wants to drop the name Razor Fraser. It's a bit. I don't know if anybody who's. I don't know who's advising these people. It's a bit tongue in cheek, but there's nothing funny about knife crime. But I understand where the names come from. You know, Razor and Fraser. I get it, but if someone who's really is anti-knife crime, he might want to think about dropping that moniker. It just doesn't sit well with me. But again, maybe that's me.
Yeah, Julian going in on Fraser.
I'm definitely not going on Fraser, mate. He's my favourite right now. Him and Natasha Jonas, top 5 boxers for me right now.
They've done well, aren't they both?
Brilliant, love them both.
Big fight tonight. Ruiz against Ortiz. What do you think, Julian?
It's a good fight. I like Andy Ruiz. Always a little bit disappointed how he ate himself out of the heavyweight championship, just like Buster Douglas did the same thing. But I love how he's knuckled down. You know, he's getting out there now a little bit more regular. Ortiz, for me, is almost like the biggest underachiever in the heavyweight division because skill-wise, you know, Luis Ortiz is a really brilliant amateur, super sharp boxer, big puncher. But I think his professional career has been a real anticlimax. You would have expected somebody with, I know he fought Wilder twice and he got ironed out by some great shots, but you would have expected somebody with his pedigree to have been a world champion by now, especially when we say that world titles in some instances are quite easy to pick. But this is where he's effectively, he's been sidelined, hasn't he? Because he doesn't sell massive tickets. He's not a golden boy, you know, like all Cuban defects. You know, why didn't Ortiz get the shot at Charles Martin, all that type of stuff? Why didn't he pick up one of these easier world titles? So for me, disappointing career for Luis Ortiz. I think the southpaw stance will give Ruiz some real problems because he really, you know, he really has got a good backhand. He's got a good left cross. He's awkward, he's strong, but I think he'll struggle with Ruiz's pace. I think Andy Ruiz has got a great pace. He's busy, good ring craft, keeps moving the feet, keeps moving the head, and I expect him to win. I expect him to just outlast Ortiz, and he'll either beat him anytime after 6 rounds or he'll beat him on points, but I just think he'll be a bit too busy for him. But we might get those moments where he potentially puts Ruiz over. We know Ruiz can be put over with, you know, real sharp shots. It's happened 2 or 3 times in his career. So I think Ruiz wins the fight, might have to climb up off the floor, but it'll be just too fresh, too active and too busy for Luis Ortiz.
I'm going to go Luis Ortiz. KO.
It's not impossible.
A lot of hype about Callum Smith at the moment. Does he beat Bivol or beat a beef?
No, I don't think he beats either of them. I think he's a good fighter. I've always liked him. There's a, you know, always says if you want to teach a fighter how to throw a left hook or a catch hook, Callum Smith's your man. Really close, tight family. is one of those fighters for me that's a good world-class fighter who's been a world champion and he's been a unified world champion, but he's never looked like the absolute cream of the division for me. You know, I think there's just some fighters, not just domestic, not just British, but some fighters are really, really good and win world titles, but you know that they're kind of half a level below the best in that division. I'll give you examples. So Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank and Steve Collins, they always had the kind of, I know Ben had the great win over McClellan, but they would have never beaten a Michael Nunn or James Toney or Roy Jones, would they? They would have never beaten those guys. Those guys,
did they?
They didn't go near him. He never got mentioned. It never got talked about, and they just weren't at that elite level. When I say elite, I'm talking the absolute 0.1% of world champions. I'm not talking world champion. I'm talking elite world champions. Now, I think Bivol surprised me somewhat, but Bivol looks like he's really is that kind of level. I think Beterbiev is exactly the same. They're the best light heavyweights in the world, and I think, you know, the left hooks that Callum Smith's knocking people out with at a certain level, it wouldn't be effective against them. And I can't forget the way that, even though they didn't have the longest camp, the way that Canelo Alvarez just walked him back and effectively just destroyed him, didn't he? Methodically took Callum Smith apart. And I think both of those guys would beat him in different styles, in different ways. I think Bivol would outbox him and pick him off. And I think Beterbiev would just bulldoze him, but it'd be a great fight.
Yeah. What's Callum Smith's best 3 wins, Julian?
Well, we got the George Groves one, haven't we? We have to say the George Groves one. It was a beautiful finish, absolute textbook. And other than that, well, I'll struggle. I mean, I thought it was domestic level, but he was brilliant when he knocked out Rocky Fielding. Again, it was a 1 round, smashed into pieces in 1 round. That was a really eye-opening win, was that one. And he's a good fighter.
Overachieved, couldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, he was a good amateur. I think, did he win the silver in the Worlds or something? It was a good touted amateur. One memory I've got of Callum Smith, and it's just a personal memory, was I took Sykes over to spar. I think it was Stephen Smith at the time. It might have been Stephen Smith or Scott Quigg over to Joe's gym. I can't remember which time it was. And chatting to Joe, and he'd always kind of introduce you to fighters and tell you who was who. And I didn't recognize Callum Smith, and he just turned over with Joe. I don't think he's had his pro debut. And Joe, he may not have it now, I don't know. He's got this huge bag, you know, this massive, heavy bag. And Callum Smith was on the bag, and he was hitting this bag. And I've never seen a super middleweight at the time that big. He's an absolute giant of a super middleweight. And we've all seen the George Foreman clip, you know, the rumble in the jungle when he's hitting that bag and there's the big dint and Foreman's really laying into this bag, and it's like mind-blowing. I remember Callum Smith hitting this bag, and I just remembered when you see sometimes punches up close, he had frightening power, did Callum Smith, and he won't remember us being there, but he was hitting this bag, and it was phenomenal power this was before he'd even turned over. It was phenomenal power. And I remember making a comment to Joe about it, and Joe's like nodded like, yeah, he's really destructive on the pads. So I like Callum Smith. I think he's a good fighter. He's won world titles, an immense career. He got a little bit lucky with the Ryder fight, but fighters sometimes get decisions that they may or may not deserve. But again, repeat myself, but I think he's probably the 4th or 5th best light heavyweight in the world, but I don't think he's any higher up than that.
Do you think that we should have Yard, Johnson, Callum Smith, and, you know, another couple of us all get at it domestic?
Well, yeah, they're missing out, Russell, aren't they? They're missing out because
they're missing out. They don't know what they're missing, because these fights could be as big as any world title fight, can't they, to British fans?
Yeah, these are really big fights. You know what? The winner moves on, and the loser maybe gets to fight somebody else in another great domestic fight. And this is the problem that we've got now, isn't it? The promoters won't work with each other that much, reluctantly when they do. We had the what was a recent Buatsi, and was it Callum Johnson purse bid, and that went. It's just like you're just stopping these managers, and I don't know if the trainers are having a big say as well, but somebody is stopping these big fights from happening because I don't. Yeah, and I'll tell you, fighters aren't afraid of fighters, mate. Fighters aren't. I mean, you get the odd one who would swerve somebody, but fighters aren't afraid of fighters. They'll fight each other, not a problem.
Matchmakers have got an hard job, haven't they?
Really, really difficult job.
I mean, I know I keep having a dig at them, but it's an hard job to do, trust me.
Well, it's an hard job to do because the trainers and the managers and everybody else to sign off on it.
Everybody's putting the snouts in. There's people putting the snouts in who haven't even got board license, so they're putting the snouts into stuff. And because there's no person or they're related to the person, well, there's too many cooks spoil the broth, as Big Ron used to say. Right. Virgil Hunter, what's your opinion on him? Do you think it's a myth? Was I out of order putting that video out?
I think he's
up into this like mythical, superhuman, magical trainer, aren't they? The Americans.
This is sometimes the problem that happens in boxing. You see, I'll always talk about Emmanuel Stewart, and Emmanuel Stewart wasn't just known for his work with Thomas Hearns, was he? Emmanuel Stewart had world champions that people don't remember, like Jimmy Paul, really good world champion. He did a lot of work in the early days with Michael Mora. We got Hearns, and he did a lot of work with Mike McCallum, and obviously then we had the Klitschko's and Lennox Lewis.
Jermaine Taylor, Lennox.
Yeah. Proven, brilliant coach. But what can sometimes happen with coaches is they just fall upon a guy, and I've always said it's not who's the best coach. Sometimes it's who's the best fit for that fighter and that coach. And sometimes coaches fall upon somebody, and that person goes on to be massively successful, even when they stay with them. And sometimes as well, like an Andre Ward, I think he did some things instinctively, and he had a lot of ring craft that the coach, you can't give the coach too much credit for that. So I always go back to someone like Larry Holmes. So Eddie Futch was a great coach. And then we had Rich Giacchetti, who was Larry Holmes's coach. But who did Rich Giacchetti have really apart from Larry Holmes? And this is something that's possibly the same with Virgil Hunter. He did a little shift with Amir Khan. Didn't see any improvements really there. Andre Ward worked really well with him, but Andre Ward probably liked his approach to boxing and his philosophy on boxing, and it was a really successful relationship. But ultimately, what else are they doing with these other fighters? So for me, a great coach is somebody who can work with fighters of so many different levels of ability and different styles and improve them. Doesn't matter if you improve them to the level of a central area champion or you improve them to the level of an undisputed champion. None of that matters. But what happens is we get coaches of the moment, don't we? We get people of the moment who ride a trend, and everybody said, oh, he's a great coach, he's a great coach, he's a great coach. But ultimately, we all know this, that some of the best coaches, so for example, some of the best coaches in Britain are the ones that nobody's heard of, the ones who work at boys' clubs, who get kids who walk into the gym who's got 2 left feet and no confidence. And they get them to, national development championships or Yorkshire titles and stuff. Kids who not that great at fighting. Those are the unsung heroes of coaching. So Virgil Hunter, you're going to get hate, you're going to get this, you're going to get that. But you have to be analytical and statistical. And you have to look at Virgil Hunter and say, who's he brought through? Who's he developed? And who has he continually done that with? And this is the thing where, I mentioned Emmanuel Stewart, but you got Al Certo, you got other people who have a big CV to their name, and they've done it with fighters of all different levels. So sometimes, as you know, Russell, your delivery gets criticised because you can come across with your delivery as being a little bit.
You don't say.
You know that, mate, don't you? But actually, if you take away your delivery, and there's a lot to what you're actually saying. So people might rave about him, but for me, at the moment, I want to see him bring on 3 or 4 other fighters, really develop them.
His CV against Joe Gallagher's, Virgil Hunter's, both Ring Magazine winners, aren't they? At Belt, the trainer at year, aren't they?
Well, that's
the
the thing.
CBs are
See,
chalk and cheese, aren't they?
you can't compare them. But what you can see is you can say there's an argument, and no disrespect to Joe, I love Joe, you know that. There's an argument to say that Joe Gallagher has never had a single fighter as good as Andre Ward. There's a real good argument to say that. But
Joe Gallagher's
collectively,
only had one Olympian though, hasn't he? Joe Murray.
yeah. But collectively, Joe Gallagher has got 50 times the success of Virgil Hunter because he's taken kids who you'd expect to win titles to titles, but Joe Gallagher's also taken kids like the job he did with Anthony Crolla. Crolla was coming off defeats to Sykes. There you go, second mention of Sykes, everybody. So Crolla was coming off defeats to Sykes. He got battered by Derry Matthews. He got the draw with Derry Matthews, you know, and look at Crolla and look how far he took Anthony Crolla. So that's a combination of Anthony Crolla's work ethic and Joe Gallagher's vision and development. So that's a coach. That's a coach taking someone from there all the way to world championship.
Everybody said Crolla were done, didn't they? Before he went on that long run, didn't they? They were all saying he was going to be a journeyman, weren't they? A lot of people.
And people were writing him off. You know, he dropped down to English title level. He had that unfortunate fight with Kieran Farrell, but he went back to the drawing board, didn't he? And then he'd get beat again, and he kept at it. But you have to give the coach some credit for sticking by the fight first of all, because you know it was damaged goods was Crolla when Sykes beat him a second time in prize fight. It really did a number on him, but he came back and look at the job he did with him. So I want to see the Virgil Hunters do this, but it's a little bit like, I don't know the other fighters he works with, but the guy who works with Crawford, yeah, the guy who works with Crawford, and then he started working with Amir Khan, didn't he? The heavy guy. Let's just call him. I'll be politically correct. I'll say the large guy. Yeah, Bo something. What has he done with Crawford? What has he done with him? Not Crawford. No, Crawford's a brilliant fighter. What has he done with anybody else? What did he do for Amir Khan?
Trainers might just be happy with a lot with that guy, and maybe they might not see as much determination in somebody else to train in.
Yeah, and exactly.
So, okie doke.
Terence Crawford. Why couldn't I remember his name? That's stupid. Terence Crawford, yeah.
We spoke about Canelo Bivol. Ern's pushing for Canelo Bivol too, but Bivol says no, he's got other things lined up. Ernie Shavers passed away. Could we say his biggest puncher ever?
For me, it was the biggest puncher ever. I loved Acorn. I mean, that was my era. It was I was a young man when I was reading about Ernie Shavers, and we all remember World of Sport.
He bounced Larry Holmes off at canvas, didn't he?
Well, we all remember the start to World of Sport when every Saturday it would show that replay of Shavers landing that right hand on Larry Holmes that no man ever had a right to get up from that shot. And then after that, then I know Shavers knocked out Kenny Norton in one round, and then he kind of went on the slide then, and I think he got beat by James Tillis in 1980, 1981, and it really was a decline then. But Shavers was a phenomenal puncher, something like 68 knockouts in 74 wins. He was a brutal puncher. The knockout of Kenny Norton was savage. You know, he really put it on Ali. Ali was past his prime then, and he hurt Ali. You know, he had that great second fight with Larry Holmes. I mean, Jerry Quarry actually ironed him out in one round. That itself was a great KO. But Ernie Shavers was a great man from a great golden era. I was fortunate enough to shake his hand when I went to a Larry Holmes celebrity dinner. Me and Mally McIver went to see that in Manchester, and Ernie Shavers was on the door. And he actually used to do a lot of door work, didn't he, in Kent of all places. And Shavers was a fighter who was just
Liverpool at one point.
I think he was, yeah. He was a humble man. He was a phenomenal puncher with both hands. The right uppercut that dispatched Kenny Norton was savage. And I can't remember the quote exactly, but there was a quote that James Tillis said, because Tillis beat Shavers on a big Larry Holmes undercard in 1981. And they asked James Tillis, because he got dropped by Shavers in the 8th round. It was a brutal shot. Shavers just couldn't finish him off. And I think they asked James Tillis what it was like getting hit by Ernie Shavers. And I can't remember the quote, but he made he said something about, I just remember little blue mice playing flutes and things, and he was alluding to the fact that he hit me that hard, I didn't know where he was, and I was just almost like hallucinating. That Ernie Shavers hit me that hard. And Randall Tex Cobb paid tribute to Shavers. He also said that Randy Tex Cobb obviously had the best chin in boxing at that time. And he took Shavers' power, and he says, he just hit me that hard. He says, no man has a right to punch that hard. So for me, it was a kind of a sad bit of news that I got this week, because Shavers was, as you know, I'm a huge Larry Holmes fan, and I hold a lot of affection for 80s boxing. And the Shavers, went from the 70s to the 80s. Brilliant man, humble man. And, a fighter like Ernie Shavers been around today, we'd have had some fun with him, wouldn't we? But rest in peace, Ernie. Really tremendous man.
Yeah, rest in peace, Ernie Shavers. Massive puncher. Bentley versus Morrison this month. What do you reckon?
It's a good fight, is that one? I think it's a long fight. I suspect Bentley might win that fight. Morrison's an improved fighter. I don't know. I just think Bentley might just outlast him. But when you get
experience for him.
Yeah, when you get a fight that's a 55-45 fight, that's how I see that fight. If Morrison did a number on Bentley, you wouldn't turn around and say, wow, that was a big shock. You'd say he's more than capable of it. But
it's a 60-40 in Bentley's favour, isn't it? When you look at it.
It is, and I just think it'll probably be a little bit too much for him. But I think it'll be
Marcus Morrison, isn't he?
He definitely is. I mean, he gave,
I hope he wins.
Chris Eubank an argument, and I hope he wins as well, because he's not one of those fighters who's been matched easy, is he? He's been
matched. Him shouting his gob off as well, do you?
Quiet lad. It's a good fight, actually. I like to see those fights.
Savannah next week. Fight week starts tomorrow. Savannah Shields. Game on.
Can't wait for that one. I don't know if you want to do a midweek and break that down, Russell. Always up to you, but it's a really good fight. Yeah, let's break it down midweek. But I think it's a brilliant fight. The only thing I will say about this fight, whenever I see opinions on this fight, it's almost like people are saying Savannah Marshall's just going to be way too much for her, and that's a 50-50 fight. And I don't think Peter Fury for 1 minute thinks it's anything other than a 50-50 fight. Clarissa Shields is no mug. She's got fast hands. And what you have to look at, and I like Savannah Marshall, I really think she's, look, if you're going to have somebody in boxing who's just so nice and so honest and so straight and dedicated, that's the kind of fighter I could work with all day long. There's no edge to that girl whatsoever. Clarissa Shields, as we know, she's a big mouth. She's cocky. She's brash. She's very American, but she's got some great hands on her. She's got some fantastic accomplishments. But I see it as being a really difficult fight, and I can't wait for that one. I think that's, for me, it's a much more mouth-watering fight than Serrano and Taylor. I think there's going to be more fireworks in this fight.
This is the biggest female fight ever, in my opinion, ever.
It's massive.
There's more eyes on this one than there ever has been on others, so it's got to be big, hasn't it?
I just saw a little bit on Behind the Ropes this morning. It might have been the first or second episode. And I love that the way Peter Fury talks to her. It's just the way he talks to Savannah Marshall. He's very direct. But what Peter Fury says is he was giving a little bit of advice on pivots. He was explaining to her how she should, do the little bit of inside work and then slide off to the right. And that was clever what he was coaching her. And he doesn't dress it up, does he?
No.
He just says, no, not like that. No, not like that. You're not doing that. You're not listening. And he just says it in such a direct way. But it showed to me that he's just he's a teacher. And we talk about this all the time, don't we? There's a difference between a coach and a difference between a teacher. And Peter Fury is a teacher of boxing. And I really like his no-nonsense approach. I like the fact that you don't see him on social media doing cameos on Instagram, doing flash pads all the time. He's just a real teacher of boxing, and you can see the respect that she's got for him. You just have to look at the eye contact and the body language between the two of them. there's no high fives and there's no dressing things up. He's like, this is a place of work. In my gym, he does.
He's
I
not
ask
into all that, is he? Though, Pete? You know, there's a lot of that goes on in gyms. There's a, you know, if you went up to him and give it the old high five, he'd just look at you like you were.
He'd look at you like there was something.
Acting goat and all that.
He wouldn't want you in his gym, and I won't say the words that he says because we're not swearing. But
High fiving.
He wouldn't want you in his gym, would he? There's no.
You wouldn't know whether to high five him anyway.
You wouldn't know what to make of him.
You prat.
He'd just look at you, mate, wouldn't he? But I like listening to him. I could listen to Peter Fury all day long.
Yeah. What about Canelo?
It's a brilliant fight.
Trilogy.
Listen, it's a massive fight in terms of the names. You know, you can see that Canelo's not the fighter that he used to be. He's not been that fighter for 2 or 3 years now. Ultimately, this really is the decider because the first fight was horrendous scorecards. You know, I thought Triple G won that first fight with room to spare. The second fight, I thought there was an argument either way, but I thought Canelo probably did the cleaner, better work in that fight. So you can argue this is a decider, but Canelo will have just too much for him in this fight. I think it's a case of how brave Golovkin can be in this fight, and if he can go 12 rounds, and I wouldn't be surprised for Canelo to stop him, but I probably think that it'll be a wide decision on points for Alvarez.
Okay then. Do you want to just go on to part 3, Julian?
Of course, mate.